Hey, good morning, everybody. Sorry for the late start there. We had a little bit of a technical difficulty. Um, just going to allow 60 or 90 seconds here for all of our attendees to load in here. Um, while we are waiting for that, I could mention that we will have some time for Q&A at the end of the presentation here today. So if you would like to use the Q&A function on the webinar to submit any questions, we'll try to get through as many of those as we can toward the end of the presentation here. All right, looks like mostly everybody's loaded in. So good morning and welcome to the inaugural edition of the Washington County Chamber of Commerce Virtual Legislative Affairs Update. I'm Will Tomeyer, Director of Economic and Tourism Development here at the Chamber, and I'm pinch hitting today for Chamber President Jeff Katula, who could not be with us as he is with his family, which recently suffered bereavement. And so, of course, the thoughts of our entire Chamber organization are with Jeff and his wife, Michelle, and their daughters during this difficult time. I would like to get started, I think, by providing a little bit of background on our guest today, Representative Tim O'Neill. Good morning, Tim, and welcome.
Good morning.
Representative O'Neill is a lifelong resident of Southwestern Pennsylvania, having graduated from Jeannette High School and Indiana University of Pennsylvania. While at IUP, he served in the ROTC program and as a member of the Pennsylvania National Guard. Upon graduation, he served on active duty with the United States Army, including a combat tour in Afghanistan. He eventually rose to the rank of captain and was awarded the Bronze Star with a V for Valor due to his service. Once returned from active duty, Tim chose to settle and raise his family in Western Pennsylvania, and also went on to earn his master's degree from the University of Pittsburgh, Katz Graduate School of Business. After working in the energy industry for a time, he was also a human resources director for a construction company. Tim currently resides in South Strabane Township with his wife, Julia, and their 3 children. And in his free time, enjoys time outdoors with his family and coaches youth football. Tim is currently serving in his 4th full term in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives and has been elected by his colleagues to serve as part of the House leadership team, currently beginning his 2nd term as a Republican whip for the 2025 legislative session. So with that out of the way, again, welcome. Thank you for being here with us this morning. I guess maybe we could start. You could give us a little background, how you ended up in the PA House. What sort of drove you to serve?
Yeah, that's it's always an interesting story. I usually try to start off just simply telling people that I fell out of bed and hit my head, and that's when I decided to run for office. Actually, the true story is I never imagined I would run for office. Never thought for a million years that I would do this, but 2017, I had the opportunity to participate in a program called Leadership Pittsburgh, and through Leadership Pittsburgh, I got exposed to Harrisburg and just the legislative activities that happen in the state. Shortly after that, my predecessor, literally 2 weeks after I was in Harrisburg with Leadership Pittsburgh, my predecessor Brandon Newman ran for and won both Republican and Democratic ticket in Washington County to become a Court of Common Pleas judge. So that set the stage that he was going to resign at the end of the year. I was approached about running by the then chairman of the Republican Party, and my initial response was still hell no. But I realized, I had achieved a certain level of success in my career, and just advancing in career was not necessarily my focus, and figuring out how we impact the community was my wife and I's focus at the time. And we realized the opportunity to serve the community in a really big and impactful way. And we jumped in two feet into the deep end and went for it. And obviously in June or May of 18 is when I was first elected, and it's changed my life ever since. That's for sure.
Yeah, and certainly a lot has happened since then. I imagine you weren't predicting a pandemic within the first few years of your election, and then everything that's happened in the meantime.
Well,
The,
it's certainly been an interesting time since I've been elected. It seems, often some of the longer serving members often say, things so much is different, and it seems like it's constantly changing. The role, the focus, exactly what impact we have in our communities is constantly changing, and certainly the pandemic was a big part of that.
yeah. Well, the 48th district, which you represent, stretches basically from the West Virginia border and east throughout the center of Washington County, all the way out to the Mon Valley and the Monongahela River. So um, that's a lot of ground to cover, and it's a varied district. I mean, you've got the city of Washington in there. You've got West Findlay. You've got the North and South Strebanes, Denora, right? I mean, so a lot of those you got rural, city, suburban. A lot of that is varied. And what are some of the challenges and maybe also benefits of representing such a varied district?
Well, look, when it really comes down to it, I think a lot of Washington County in particular has very similar viewpoints over the course of the entire county. I think the advantage of one of the greatest advantages about my district in particular is the fact that it's only within Washington County. So I'm focused solely on Washington County. I'm the only state rep in the House. There's 6 of us total that represent part of Washington County, but I'm the only one completely within the county. So that allows me to really focus my effort on our local elected officials, whether that's countywide or obviously the municipalities that I represent. And I don't necessarily have to switch my focus between those particular counties. When I'm worried about advising some county policy or state policy that relates to the county, I could solely focus on just Washington. But you're right. There's a lot of variation across the district, from relatively suburban type areas to obviously the city of Washington to very very rural areas. Throughout the course of my career, I worked for Consol Energy for a number of years. I had the opportunity to spend a lot of time in all of those areas anyway. So I think I'm actually fairly familiar with East and West Findlay because I used to drive to the Bailey coal mine quite a bit. So having a familiarity with those areas already has helped along the way, and it's been a great district to represent. It's wonderful people. Um, Many of them, like I said, have the shared values, regardless of whether you're living in the city of Washington or out in Morris Township. We generally think the same, and it's been a true pleasure for me to take that perspective out to Harrisburg.
Yeah, I'm sure it really provides you also with a sort of broad view of the issues facing not only your district, but I'm sure a lot of that translates across the state. Uh,
Absolutely.
as we touched on earlier, your colleagues in the House have entrusted you to serve as the Republican whip, which is a key part of the House leadership team. I guess, can you tell us a little bit about the role of the whip? And then also, how does serving in House leadership and serving as the whip compare to that of sort of just a rank and file member from when you started?
Sure. So as you mentioned, in order to there's 7 leadership positions. Um, to in the so we're currently we're in a 1 seat minority. The Republicans are, which means we have 7 leadership positions traditionally if you're in the majority of 8. But the leader, so the top position is the Republican leader. The next position is actually the whip. So the term the whip actually comes from an old English fox hunt, and when the king, so to speak, would go on a fox hunt, they would have foxhounds, and the fox if the group of foxhounds didn't stay on the same scent, they would just go, they would actually call it riding, and they would go everywhere onto all different scents. So they had somebody who had the job was to keep the foxhounds all on the same scent during the hunt. That person's job to do, they carried a whip, and he was called the whipper. So literally, the term comes from, basically, my job is to keep the hounds on the same direction, for the group of the caucus. So traditionally, in the majority, the whip's job is really to go out and ensure that you have the votes to pass whatever piece of legislation that you're trying to pass. It's a little bit different when you're in the minority because the votes don't matter as much. You're not trying to drive the agenda, but it is still understanding people's particular area of the state, under making sure that you're advising them on, how to best serve their constituents. And when we are trying to do something as a group and message in a particular way as a caucus, my job would be to ensure that our members are in line with that, which is often a difficult job when you're talking about 100 other members. It's often a very chaotic experience. As far as how that differs for being a rank and file member, really the leadership, well, first and foremost, I don't, as a member of leadership, I do not sit on any standing committees, with the exception of the committee on committees, and the rules committee. So I don't sit on committees that traditionally run legislation, and I'm actually barred as a member of leadership from doing so. um, Beyond that, it really has changed my focus from primarily trying to drive legislation to more of a quote unquote pure leadership role of trying to lead the caucus as opposed to driving the legislation. So, for instance, one of my key pieces of legislation was a piece of legislation called energy choice, which would prevent municipalities from banning any sort of energy um, source into your home for new construction. That was actually vetoed by Governor Wolf a number of years ago. So the process hasn't stopped. So we're still trying to get that legislation passed. I've actually shifted that to a new member who has more of a bandwidth in order to just drive the legislation than I do in the whip's role. So that's one example. That's the main difference. There's a lot of responsibilities across the Commonwealth. I I think last year I put 50,000 miles on my vehicle, because I have responsibilities all across the state. So I travel quite a bit at this point, and it's largely due to being the web.
Well, so that sort of pivots nicely into what I wanted to talk about next, which was your legislative priorities. But maybe what I'm hearing is, so you don't really have as much input on the day to day, like sponsoring of bills or.
Well, so I still certainly have the capacity and ability to sponsor bills. I guess I don't want to mislead you with what I just said. It's not I don't have as much capacity to sponsor as much legislation. So a couple key one key area of legislation that I've always been focused on is energy. I think I was actually put on the Environmental Resources and Energy Committee from the very first moment I stepped into the House, and it's been my policy focus. So energy policy is something that I continue to work on. At this point, I might not be personally sponsoring. I might not be the prime sponsor on particular bills, but I am highly involved and directly involved in crafting our caucus wide energy policy. as we move forward. So it is, especially this coming session, the governor has just recently acknowledged that energy policy is something that we need to focus on. I disagree with some of the direction he's going, but nevertheless, energy policy is something our caucus will certainly be focused on. It'll be a priority of the House Republican caucus. I believe that's true for the Senate Republicans as well. I don't have the ability to speak for them, but I think they're in line with that as well. So there's certainly a legislative focus. I don't want to imply that I don't think about legislation anymore. It's just any specific piece of legislation is most likely going to have somebody else's name directly tied to it, where I'm helping more in the bigger picture as opposed to the specific piece of legislation moving forward.
Okay. Um, Another thing you mentioned, the one seat majority for the Democrats in the House. The Senate is obviously a Republican majority, and we've got a Democratic governor with Governor Shapiro. How do you feel that that split government helps to drive compromise and policy, things forward, or does it grind some things to a halt? I mean, what's your take on that?
Yes, I think so. Here's the reality of the situation: is when there is a lot of compromise that can and does happen. I'll be honest though, the more publicity there is around that compromise in today's political world, the harder it is to do that. So honestly, we've often said, and we've had this discussion with our members of our caucus, that uh, the best time to improve bills and make come to an agreement on any given piece of legislation is actually in committee, because that's the easiest place to do it. When something comes to the whole house, it often becomes a political. I don't want to, at the risk of downplaying what I do, it often becomes a political show or performance, and that performative nature or phenomenon that is occurring in today's environment certainly gets in the way of actually getting to uh, a true compromised piece of legislation that is helpful to most parties. There's certainly a maxim out in Harrisburg that um, nobody gets everything that they want, and and that's true. But it's when you wrap in that performative nature of today's political world, it makes it much harder to do those compromising things. With that said, it is happening. It's happening all the time. As far as specifically the divided legislature, I think what makes it worse, or harder, is when any given, and all of us have the capacity to do it, but when any given party makes it about the performance as opposed to about getting an issue resolved, um, that's when it becomes hard. But that's when it becomes a difficult thing to accomplish. Now, there's one of the things that's happening right now in the state that's a big issue is actually avian flu. So avian flu is threatening our chicken flocks across the state. Pennsylvania is a very large producer of both chicken and eggs. And if you've seen the price of eggs recently, it's largely being driven by the avian flu scare. Um, we just passed a bill, literally in a matter of days, that went through both the House and the Senate and sent to the governor for signature, to improve the testing capacities around avian flu. So when there is something that needs to be accomplished that isn't going to be a political performance, we can still do it and do it in a bipartisan fashion. Unfortunately, the performative nature gets in the way quite a bit.
Okay. Well, um, as I'm sure most folks know, actually, let me take one quick uh, second here to again plug our Q&A button down at the bottom of the screen there. Please feel free to submit any questions. We don't have any yet, so if you submit a question, you'll be the first one, and you'll definitely probably get it answered. Um, so Governor Shapiro on Tuesday uh, announced his 2025-26 budget proposal. Um, it was a $51.5 billion spending plan, the first time that the state budget has ever crested that $50 billion mark, proposed anyway. Um, a lot of different numbers I could go into here. But I guess, what are your thoughts?
Well, first and foremost, $51.5 billion. If I don't have the math in front of me, but I think it's a 7.5% increase
Yep.
in spending. It's completely unsustainable. We're talking. It's I The IFO, which is the Independent Fiscal Office, projects revenues to increase. I think it's 1.3 billion over the course of the year, and the idea that we're going to more than double that in our spending it's obvious to anybody that that is just simply unsustainable. Now, the governor in his budget proposal is relying on a number of revenue sources that aren't have yet to be enacted, which I don't think is ever a safe thing to do. And at the end of next fiscal year, according to his projections, he's going to withdraw. I think it's $1.6 billion from our rainy day fund. So, it, at the rate we're spending, and the reality of our spending in the state is it never goes down. Every year that I've been in office, I think the first year was in 2018. I believe the budget was $36 billion. So 6.5 years this is my, I guess this would be my eighth budget cycle, because I came in right in the middle of, or almost right at the end of the first budget. And so in those eight budgets, it's gone from 36 billion to 51.5 billion. And it's not sustainable. We do have a record amount in our rainy day fund, more than we've ever had, but this spending rate will draw down that money in a number of 2 or 3 years. Um, so I would like to see a real hard look at some of the proposals in this budget, some of the ways that we could go about saving money to ensure that there's no possibilities of a tax increase. And before we start relying on revenues that aren't in, we've got to hash out that policy and actually pass and enact those policies into law. And there's no doubt that there are several controversial things that he's relying on for revenue. One of them is the CNI, the corporate net income tax reduction acceleration, which will lower the amount of revenue under or so. So he is. So he's actually he looks at it as an increased revenue because he is including combined reporting, which he knows is a poison pill for us. We will not support an acceleration of the corporate net income tax if it includes combined reporting. Another one is legalization of adult use marijuana. Um, that has a huge amount of pitfalls in getting passed. I'm not saying it'll never get passed, but to simply think that it's going to happen in this next year, we're going to have revenue from it, I think is a lofty goal. And then another one of them is skill games, regulating and taxing skill games. I think that's probably in my mind the most likely thing to get done. But again, depending on when it gets done, certainly determines when that revenue source begins. And then finally, he's also relying on increased revenue from a minimum wage increase. that is, the argument against the minimum wage for years has been, real wages are above that. Why are we even worried about raising the floor when the market has already corrected for that? So all of those things are major flags that I see in the current budget proposal. Obviously, the budget proposal, this is just the beginning of the process as we move forward. Um, starting I think starting next week or the week after will be budget hearings where each one of the department secretaries will come in and answer questions to both the Senate and House Appropriations Committee as we hash through the budget proposal and come up with a more negotiated product.
Okay. Um, well, I see a few question and answer Q&As have come in. Some digging a little deeper into the budget, so we'll get to those in a couple minutes here. I did want to touch on sort of some local policy issues, and you touched on energy policy being a big focus of yours. I think obviously the energy industry is so important to our local economy. And the IFO, the Pennsylvania Independent Fiscal Office, just released a report the other day that indicates that Pennsylvania has remained the top electricity export state within our grid, the PGM grid, while carbon emissions from electricity generation continue their long-term decline. I think a lot of that to do with natural gas becoming the primary, generation fuel. But they reported that also consumption is growing largely due to the data centers and AI growth in that sector. It would seem like a natural fit for Pennsylvania that we're sitting on a world-class energy resource. Has there been any initiatives at the state level to incentivize or in any other kind of way attract data centers? Sort of take advantage of our energy wealth here?
Yes, actually. So there was a piece of legislation that was enacted into law several years ago. I believe the prime sponsor was Donna Overlander, that specifically incentivized data centers in particular. Um, that's been there's a number of programs from the economic development standpoint that the builders or the operators or the owners of these facilities would potentially be eligible for. But Will, you began by talking about energy, and we've got a huge issue in regards to attracting these businesses because we currently have very poor energy policy, despite all of the things that you just said. As I would even argue that we actually don't even have any real coherent statewide energy policy. The governor just proposed a 6-point plan um, around energy that is really just the same old tired programs that have been passed before. Reggie, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, that Governor Wolf unilaterally entered us into. For those that aren't aware, Reggie is basically a cap and tax program on fossil fuel electricity generation, and it's a multi-state compact, interstate compact, and Governor Wolf entered us into it, began the process for Pennsylvania to enter Reggie. He was subsequently sued, and the Commonwealth Court overturned us entering it, said it was unconstitutional for him to do it unilaterally because it was a tax. Has Josh Shapiro actually appealed that to the state Supreme Court, where it still sits awaiting decision. Um, Governor Shapiro just recently said that, well, so last year or the year before, he introduced his own version of Reggie called, I believe it's called PACER. PACER is an acronym. I don't know what it stands for, but it's essentially a Pennsylvania only cap and tax program. And and what I find as a bit hypocritical, to be honest with you, is just recently he last week he was in Pittsburgh touting this program and his energy plan, um, and said now is the time to act. He will pull us out of Reggie if we pass Pacer. Yeah, and to me that's very disingenuous. Either way, you're having the same effect in the industry. Your our policy and the decisions that are being made by policymakers and the governor in particular, in regards to energy, is dissuading investments in the Commonwealth, and that has created a scenario where we don't the stability of the grid is at risk as more of these energy sources come online, and short of short of private deals being cut, I'm not sure that these centers come to Pennsylvania because of this reason. So, and what I mean by private deals is, I think it was Microsoft just signed a deal with 3 Mile Island. They're going to restart 3 Mile Island, and they're going to locate a data center on 3 Mile Island next to the power plant. And the power plant, it's not going to connect to the grid. It's just going to power that data center. So short of deals like that, uh, we're we're going to be we're going to miss out on some of these opportunities just because of our incoherent energy policy in the Commonwealth.
Uh, what do you think is the solution then? From your perspective, what does the legislature and the governor need to do to to improve that energy policy and make it more attractive for not only data centers but all. I mean, every company uses some amount of energy, but manufacturing, those types of large energy users. What is your position on what improvements could we make at the state level?
Yeah, look, when it really comes down to it, the investment is about, we need to encourage investment. So whether that's the regulatory climate, the permitting process, uh, whether or not I don't even think we necessarily need grant programs. We just need a stable environment that actually signals the business. And you all know this better than I do, but actually signals the business that their investments are wanted, not just simply going to be punished time and time again. And we're seeing it across the state. One of the things Governor Shapiro likes to say quite a bit is that he hates losing to Ohio. Well, Ohio continues to make decisions that are attracting businesses, and Pennsylvania does not. So if we actually don't want to lose to Ohio, then let's start acting a little bit more like Ohio.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reduction in the corporate net income tax is a good start, and it takes us from the 50th worst state to, for corporate net income taxes to, maybe the 46th now. But, by the time that, and I understand that's a process, right? To reduce it, you got to replace those revenues somehow, or cut spending. But yeah, I definitely, especially for us in the western half of the state, we're competing against the Ohio's, the West Virginias, Maryland, Michigan, places that have adopted a much more sort of business friendly, growth friendly agenda, um, and it does make it tough to compete, with those states.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, we've got about 8 minutes left here, so I think maybe we could touch on a couple of these Q&A questions that came in. Um, you spoke a little bit about the governor's energy plan, and the PACER and press proposals. We had a question here that asks, the governor said he would reintroduce PACER and press his proposals for a carbon tax on electricity and production for boosting alternative energy sources from 8 to 50%. How do you see that playing out in discussions around energy policy? I guess, the boosting of alternative energy sources.
Well, look, I think the reality is, for me, and I think I could speak for many of my colleagues, and the governor did say this. I believe in allowing the market to promote whatever energy source makes sense in the market. If that ends up being solar or wind or some other type of energy production, then I support it. What I disagree with is the government getting in a way and putting the thumb on the scale. I think an all the above approach is the right approach, but I will tell you I think there's very little interest on my side of the aisle, both in the House and the Senate, to move the governor's proposed PACER or PRESS programs. I would be very surprised if any of them get enacted into law in the coming term, certainly, and even beyond that. We want a true above, all of the above program, a true focus on unleashing and getting government out of the way for and allowing the market to really drive where we need to go. That's what I anticipate. That's what I would certainly support moving forward. And I don't think we will quit until that's what we get from the government.
Excellent. Okay, another question here. We talked a bit about the budget proposal and the upcoming hearings and the process. We still got to go through. What's your outlook on the budget being completed on time this year? And do you anticipate any major sticking points, that we didn't cover, I suppose?
Well, and any major sticking points. I think a discussion around higher education is potentially going to be a sticking point. There A perennial issue for the past couple of years is issues around school choice legislation. Um, for those that don't remember, in Governor Shapiro's first budget, he actually publicly supported a proposal called a Lifeline Scholarship, which is a a very limited school voucher program for the poor, for the worst performing schools in the state. And then, so it was included in that budget, and he ended up line item vetoing that particular proposal. So that still hangs out there as one of the sticking points uh, that a lot of us would like to see done. Whether or not you have an on time budget, I would I don't see any real reason to have an extended budget impasse. Um, I will tell you that the urgency of getting it done on June 30th doesn't exactly exist anymore. It, there's the levers to ensure that it's done exactly on time before June 30th. It's just not the same feeling anymore. So whether or not we hit that exact that date, honestly, it's way too early to tell. But I don't see any real reason why there'd be an extended budget impasse, short of one of these relatively unrealistic proposals being insisted upon indefinitely. So no, I think you'd probably see a relatively quick budget at this point. I don't see any reason not to.
Along those same lines, what are your thoughts on the governor's request to increase the pre-K funding? Think that will pass or has a chance to be included in the budget?
Yeah, I do. I think we've certainly acknowledged that there are issues across the education system, and unfortunately the data shows that test scores for school age children are going down since COVID. And we've got to find ways to address it. When you specifically talk about pre-K and early intervention type programming, I do think you have broad bipartisan support for things along those lines. There is certainly a thought process in the General Assembly right now that we need to make sure we're not just throwing money at problems, that we're actually trying to measure outcomes and ensure money is being spent wisely and prudently. Um, but at the same time, I do think there is support to continue to increase money around education, to continue to increase money around early education, whether that's pre-K, early intervention. Uh, it, it is, I personally think it's a key component. Child care and that field, broad field of pre-K and early intervention and what have you, it is a unique scenario where it's also an economic. It ties directly to whether or not people can work. So it's something we have to do a better job of figuring out, making sure we're spending that money effectively and making sure we're investing in it, quite frankly.
Excellent. Well, we promised to have everybody out of here at 9:45, so I think we will leave it there for now. But I want to thank you again, Tim, for taking the time to join us this morning for our inaugural legislative affairs webinar. I think this is something we'd like to continue to do in the future, and hopefully we can have you back someday to maybe update us on why the budget didn't pass on June 30th.
Yeah, I'd love to anytime, Will.
Awesome. Thank you very much again for joining us. Before we go, I do want to let everyone know about a couple upcoming events for the chamber. Got to put in some plugs here for Thursday, February 20th. We're hosting our Washington County State of the Economy presented by Community Bank. This is our annual event showcasing the county's successes, challenges, and the economic outlook for 2025. This year's event will feature Russell Mills, senior principal for the Pittsburgh branch of the Federal Reserve, an energy update from Jim Welty, the new president of the Marcellus Shale Coalition, and a higher education roundtable with the presidents of Pennsylvania West, Washington and Jefferson, and Waynesburg universities. And also, we just opened up our nomination process for the Washington County Athena Award. So please, if there's a person in your life that embodies the Athena mission of supporting, developing, and honoring women leaders, please consider nominating them at washcoathena.com. That's www.washcoathena.com. So thank you again to Representative O'Neill for taking the time to be with us this morning. And thanks to all of you that participated and put some Q&A questions in there for us. Hopefully you guys learned something new today, and we'll see you for the next one.